Hey, are you feeling trapped by your budget limitations, and is your cinematography suffering because of it? Do you get it? Do you see what I did there? Because I'm in a jail and... Hey, what's up guys? Chris Jr. here for Kriscoart Productions. Welcome to another episode of Get the Film Look. All a film is lights and shadows, and if we can harness that idea, we can create more beautiful images that can serve the story that we're trying to tell. Now, one of the main things that we're going to be talking about today is creating separation. So creating separation with light, with color, or even by adding atmospheric elements such as dust particles and haze. So this is all done by So we're going to explore how to create separation with light, with color, and even by adding different atmospheric elements such as haze and different dust particles, all to just further separate your subject from your background. And we're going to do this simply by rotoscoping your subject out, and this way you have two different layers, so you have your subject completely separate from your background. Okay. So sometimes due to budget limitations and lack of permits, you can't get the look that you want. Just like myself here, I'm not really supposed to be here. You know, you don't have full control over your lighting, and that oftentimes results in a pretty boring and flat look. Now, sometimes that's good, and in some cases, you could want that. For example, if your character is feeling overwhelmed by its environment and you really want to show that, then maybe having no separation with the background and having your subject kind of merge with the background could be a way to serve the type of tone that you're trying to establish. But most times you want some separation just because it's a lot more pleasing to look at, and it's hard to do sometimes if you don't have permits to set up lights. Just like myself right now, I broke into this place. I'm not supposed to be here, but good so far. Now, before jumping in, I wanted to thank AV3 for making this video possible. Now, although you can still follow along with everything that comes stock into After Effects, it doesn't hurt to have tools like the Magic Bullet Suite and Particular to help us out a little bit. So I'm partnering with AV3 for this episode again. They're just such a great place to get all top-of-the-line plugins at a discounted rate, so really recommend them. If you're thinking of getting a plugin, definitely get it through them. So with that being said, let's take a look at some of the things that we can create with the techniques that we're going to be covering today. So let's get started and let's break down exactly what you just saw and more. All right, so the very first step is rotoscoping, and it's not the most exciting thing in the world, and actually by the time you're done with this, you're gonna wanna kill a small puppy, but it will be worth it. It is very tedious work, and there's a few ways to make it a little bit less painful, and just something that I found myself doing quite often when I'm rotoscoping people is to rotoscope limbs and heads and torsos and just keep them all separate with different masks, so that when all those points start to intersect and, you know, arm starts flinging around, things don't get too messy, and can be quite helpful in keeping your sanity. So now that we've done that tedious rotoscoping work, this is where the fun begins, because now you have full control over your entire scene. You have your subject, which in our case is your focal point of interest in your composition, and you have that separate from everything else. And this is what gives us full control of our shot, because now we can add some effects to just the background or some effects to just the foreground. So let's take a look at what kind of changes we can do in terms of lighting right inside of After Effects. All right, so I'm gonna rename these real quick. We have our background that is now separate from our subject that we've rotoscoped. And now you can see that if I add an effect to just a background, such as exposure, you can see how that's just affecting the background. So moving on with that idea, we're just gonna start creating some solids and essentially painting shadows back in by using solids and applying some masks to those solids. So let's start, and I'm gonna turn the first solid off. And by the way, if you noticed, as I'm just tracing this general shape of this doorway. I actually picked a color that is present in my scene. So I picked one of the darker colors since we're introducing shadows with these solids. And the reason why I did this instead of just picking black is because now we have a color that is actually present in our scene, and that helps us ground the whole thing more into what we actually have in terms of footage. So it'll blend in a lot easier, and it just works a little bit better. So you can see that I created the second mask because we want to see through those bars. So we want to set that second mask to subtract. And now you can see that we've essentially just outlined a shape in our shot with a solid. So we're going to keep moving it on from there. We're going to create another solid. Maybe we can make this one slightly brighter. And we're just going to keep painting different geometry in our scene. So it's essentially, we're kind of faking this 3D scene out of this footage that we have. So I'm going to just keep rotoing every little part. So like the right wall, I'm going to do the left wall now, and then you can move on to the back walls. It doesn't have to be this detailed, you know, but I just prefer to keep things kind of separate and organized in this sort of way. You could probably get away with using like maybe just like a full solid for most of it, but this is just what worked for me in this specific type of shot. So once we've done that, we're going to introduce some additional masks, and this time these are to take chunks out of the solids that we created. So we're going to set those to subtract, and when we feather them out, you can see how they're essentially kind of simulating the light falling off onto these solids from our source of light, which in our case is the window all the way in the back. So I'm going to keep repeating this process, and as I'm doing this, I'm trying to keep in mind how light would behave coming from that window and how it would, you know, interact with the surfaces that are around it. Now before we move on, I'm going to go under my project settings by clicking on this icon. Now I'm going to change my project from 8 bits per channel to 16 bits per channel or higher. If you're feeling a bit daring, go for 32. You can never go wrong with that. Essentially, it's just giving After Effects more information to play with, and it allows the effects and everything really in our composition to interact much better and give us much cleaner results. So an issue that we're going to run into is as I'm lowering the opacity of all these elements, you start to see where they intersect. So you start seeing things that are beyond the doorway, and we really shouldn't be seeing that. So this is where alpha mats come in, and this can be a bit tricky if you've never used alpha mats before. But essentially what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this doorway element, and we're going to use its alpha information to pretty much cut out or hide anything behind it in terms of all those other solids that we created. So we're going to keep doing this process. We're going to keep duplicating that doorway that should be obstructing the view, and we're going to set it as the alpha inverted mat of any solid that we need to not see past the point of the doorway. We're telling it, take this chunk out because we actually have an object here we don't want to see past. If this is your first time dealing with alpha mats, you'll feel more comfortable by the end of it, and maybe watching it again could help you more. And again, feel free to ask me questions in the comment section. I will reply as much as I can. All right, so the last step, very simple. We're sort of going to create a vignette. So we're going to pick, again, a color that is grounded into our scene, and then I'm just going to kind of draw a shape around our light source, just a very broad, just generic shape. We're going to set that to subtract, and then if I turn it back on, you can see what that's doing. We're going to feather it out quite a bit, and then we can set that to a blending mode such as overlay, and yeah, obviously drop down the opacity. Make it as extreme as you want, but I prefer a more subtle look because, you know, once it starts looking like a vignette, then I'm not a huge fan of that.
We're off to a good start.
So now that we've done that, let's take it a step further and let's see what kind of things we can do with color. Now I've made a few other videos about color and color theory, and I really recommend you guys check those out because that will give you more of an understanding on how to apply these techniques and how to really make it effective for the type of tone and the type of story that you're trying to tell. Now you don't have to necessarily just use color to add separation. Color can be used in so many different ways as we have explored in past videos, but you can also use it to add graphic weight to a part of your composition. And graphic weight essentially is just a way to guide your audience's eyes to a specific element, a specific part of your shot, or even a subject that you really want your audience to notice. But pretty much the same techniques apply. For this case, we're just going to create some separation by affecting the background color in order to make your subject stand out even more. All right, so let's start adding some color into our shot. Now we're going to start by the shadows. So I'm going to create a new solid, and I'm going to pick like a dark bluish color, and you can pick whatever color you want, but just know that whatever color you choose is going to be the color that you're tinting your shadows with. So once you find it, make a duplicate copy of the doorway solid that we're using all the time, and we're going to be using that as the alpha matte of that solid that we just created. So let's place it below our subject. Let's set it as the alpha matte of the doorway, and now if I turn it back on, you can see how that bluish solid that we picked is now completely contained within the doorway. So I'm going to lower the opacity a bit. That is essentially how we have tinted that part of our scene of that bluish color. So again, same thing, we're going to add another solid, and this time I'm just going to make a much more generic shape that just can cover both of the walls on either side of me. And I'm going to make another duplicate copy of the doorway. I'm going to set it as alpha inverted matte, and then I'm going to set the mask of that solid to subtract, and then just feather it out quite a bit. And what that does is essentially now has overlaid this color on the walls without affecting the doorway itself. So the nice thing about this is it just gives us more control over it, and we can kind of control how light is behaving. We're going to set it to overlay, and then we're going to drop down the opacity quite a bit. And this way, simple enough, we've tinted the doorway, which is not facing any light, and we've tinted either side of the walls of this bluish color. So now let's move on to the highlights, and we're going to kind of add this orangish look. We're going for the much hated but very popular orange and teal, and we're going to place this orange solid right above our background layer. So same thing again. At this point, you're kind of getting it. We're going to keep duplicating that doorway element, and I want to show you something. If I set it as the alpha matte of this, we're going to get a similar result as what we did with the blue solid. It's contained in the doorway. But if we set it as alpha inverted matte, then it's going to take the information of that doorway and use it as a cutout on that solid. So hopefully with this example and more of it coming up, you'll start to really get familiar and comfortable with alpha mattes. So now at this point, we can just add some circular masks, feather them out, and if we set the solid to screen, you can see how it's almost giving this this very nice glow, this orange glow that's coming in from this window. And of course, you can add some additional masks for this door here, feather it out quite a bit so it's actually obstructing some of that light. So now we're going to actually do something pretty interesting. I really like this technique. I use it quite a bit. And now we're going to just see a different way of using alpha mattes, but when it comes to our subject. So what I'm going to do first here is I'm going to go to my subject layer. I'm going to duplicate it. And then I'm going to create a new solid. And we're going to make it that same light orange. We're going to place it below our new duplicate. And we're going to set that solid's alpha matte to look at our subject. So now what we have is a completely orange person. So now we're going to create a circular mask on that solid, and then we're going to feather it quite a bit. And as I do this, you can see how it seems like there's light kind of spilling onto our subject. And that's pretty much the idea. We just want to create this kind of subtle orange wrap around the left side of our subject that is essentially, in our mind, coming from that back window. So if we set it to screen, it's just another way for things to blend a little bit better. And you can see how we're sort of getting somewhere with this. So we're going to keep doing this. We're going to do it with the shadows as well. So I'm going to make another duplicate of our subject, grab a bluish solid, and we're going to set its alpha matte to look at our duplicate copy of our subject. So same thing here, we're going to create a mask, but this time on the right side, because that is essentially where there's not a lot of light. And then by feathering it out, we're going to start seeing some blue kind of spilling onto our subject. And to make it look like more of a shadow, we're just going to set it to overlay, and now it's casting this kind of darker side to our subject. All right, so now that we've done all of that, let's take it a step further and let's see what kind of elements we can introduce into our composition to just add a little bit of detail and just further the idea of production value and just tone and atmosphere and all of that good stuff. Alright, so this is probably my favorite part of the tutorial because it's so hassle-free. Now that we set all this up, it's just a matter of just dragging and dropping these smoke assets and fog assets. And by the way, I got these from Action VFX. Check them out, they're really amazing people, and the work that they've done and how they've come about is just really inspiring. So check out their assets because they are really incredible. They go up to 4K, so definitely check out Action VFX. So I'm going to keep adding these elements into my shot, and I'm going to lower the opacity of these guys so that they're not so obvious, but this kind of creates sort of this misty and just dirtier, dense atmosphere into this place. And we can just drag an overall smoke asset over the whole thing and lower the opacity of that as well. So this is pretty fun. Just add some more smoke elements and some dust particles, and you should have something like this. Now, another cool atmospheric element that you can add to your shots and to your compositions is these volumetric light shafts that can come through windows. For example, like that back window over there, we can add one there, and it just adds a little subtle detail. It's just a little touch that just adds some production value, and it also enhances the overall atmosphere, even of this place specifically. I mean, we're in an abandoned place, it's dusty, it's a really dense atmosphere, and something like that can really sell that even further. So we're going to add some volumetric light. First, I'm going to show you a way to do it right inside of After Effects, which works perfectly fine for this kind of scene. So we're going to create a new solid, and we're going to add fractal noise to this. Now, into my transform parameters here, I'm just going to take the scale width all the way down and increase the scale height as high as it goes. So we have this kind of stretched out look. Play around with the complexity a bit, and then if you go under contrast and brightness, you can maybe add a little bit of contrast. Then set this whole layer to screen, and the last effect that we're going to add is corner pin. And if I lower the opacity of this, and let's see how that looks. Okay, so if I scale this down, and I'm going to grab those 4 corner pin points, and I'm going to try to match it to sort of a direction of light coming in through that window. Once you've got it at an angle that satisfies you, pre-compose that and make sure that you move all attributes into the new composition. This allows us to create a mask without having any issues, because when you're using corner pin and you're adding masks to that layer, it just gets really weird and doesn't really respond properly. So we're going to create a second mask, and this will be set to subtract, and that when you feather that out, it's kind of like the fall off of those light rays. And then we can create another mask, just very subtle for that doorway, so that we again have that kind of physical obstruction in our scene. Set it to subtract and feather that out as well. So now it's behind our subject because we placed it right above our background, but we're still seeing it over the doorway. So you guessed it, we're just going to duplicate that doorway solid, and we're going to use it as an alpha matte to hide those light rays behind the doorway. And with that, we're done in terms of doing light rays this way. So next up, I really want to show you how to do this with Trapcode Shine, because it gives you much more control and it gives you pretty incredible results. And this, like any other plugin that I'm using, I got from AV3, and it's just an incredible place, incredible support, and everything is discounted. So if you get it, definitely consider getting it through there. So in here, starting from scratch, I duplicated my footage twice, and I added Shine to my bottom layer. Now, if I expand the pre-process properties, we're just going to increase the threshold here, and essentially what it's telling Shine is just only go for the highlights of the scene, because that's essentially where the rays will be coming out, because the window is pretty bright. So we're going to place these at an angle that makes sense for the sun to be, and then we're going to mess around with some of these other settings, such as the ray length. We're going to maybe increase that just a bit, but not make it too extreme. Now under colorize, we're actually going to set this to none, and instead of colorizing the rays with those colors that you see there, it's actually just going to use the colors that are present in the shot. And then as a last step, I'm going to add some fractal noise. It's super nice and convenient that it's built in right into the Shine plugin, and then we're going to set that blending mode to screen. So that adds just sort of this misty and smoky look. These light rays happen because light is hitting and interacting with dust particles in the air. So mess around with these settings, but essentially it's just as simple as that. We're done, and we have some pretty convincing light rays. Now the only thing left is obviously for the light rays to be behind our subject and to kind of be obstructed a little bit by that door that you're seeing in the background. So to do that, we're unfortunately going to have to do some rotoscoping, but it's not so bad because you can really feather the crap out of this mask and it will still look good, so that can allow you to do some pretty lazy masking. In my final example, I actually didn't even animate this mask. I just kind of like feathered it out and said, okay, I'm done. And that gives us this. So as a bonus, I really want to quickly run through what I did in terms of grading. I just did it really quickly with Magic Bullet looks, and it's just great because you can add some diffusion, you can add some film grain right into it. I also actually denoised my clips before doing all these effects by using Denoiser III, which is another Red Giant plugin. And another thing that I wanted to show you guys, but I didn't have time in this tutorial, was using Particular. And this comes in so handy when you're dealing with more complicated camera movements, where it's not just a camera on a tripod. This way you can actually fly through all these dust particles. So I really recommend you guys check out those plugins. I'll leave a link to them in the description. Alright guys, so hopefully that was pretty painless, or just as painless as getting plugins from AV3. Okay, that was a really bad plug, but really recommend them. Check them out, because having an easy buying process and all of your plugins that you ever want with support coming from one place only, that is huge. So do yourself a favor, check them out, and if you're thinking of getting a plugin, definitely check out AV3. So this is just the start. You can see how many things you can do with these techniques. I mean, it's all about letting your creativity run wild and thinking outside the box. But the more important thing is, don't feel discouraged by what you don't have in terms of gear and in terms of budget. There's always a way to tell the story that you want to tell. Alright guys, that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned something from it. And if you did, please leave a like. And if this is your first time on this channel, subscribe for more content like this. Even though this is pretty random, I'm not usually in abandoned prisons all the time, but still, this was fun. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. My name is Chris for Kriscoart Productions, and I'll see you next time. You can see the moon.
Okay, so sunset is that way. That means I need to walk on this thing. Piece of cake, right?